typical session, sometimes 40.
Nice. Good.
Yep.
Good, good.
Well, we got more people entering the waiting room, folks. What an exciting day for STAM. Good crowd. We're going to have Chief Pachorik and Chief Wynn with us more often so we can drive up attendance. We're a few minutes after 1 o'clock. I still see the waiting room filling up. It's going to be a good crowd, but I think we'll get going in the interest of time. We're about 5 minutes past 1. I'll introduce myself briefly. I am Sean Suhosky. I'm the town manager in Athol, and I serve on the Rural Policy Advisory Commission as well. And for this year anyway, I'm the chairperson of STAM, which is a Small Town Administrators of Massachusetts. It's a group of about 100 chief municipal officers in towns that stretch across the Commonwealth, with a large emphasis also on central and western Mass. It's all communities of 12,000 population or less. And as I said, we represent about 100 of those towns in this group. And we're very pleased that you're joining us. This is a topic that I confess I should have learned more about earlier on the impacts. This is not a political meeting today. It's really to learn the nuts and bolts, understand the implications so that we can begin to plan in our budgets and operationally for the impacts of the police reform law. Notably, and our focus today will be on how it impacts smaller town departments and those that utilize part-time and reserve officers. As we seek to bring everybody up to a higher level of training, which is certainly noteworthy and good, it will be good to hear from our experts today to understand how to deal with that and what to expect. So that's enough from me. Welcome, everybody. We're going to kick it off. And in our invite, we had the little bio for each of our speakers today. They're both very accomplished, and we're very pleased to have with us Chief Mike Wynn from the city of Pittsfield, who will talk later. He is also a governor's appointee to the Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission post, which we're going to learn more about as well. So he has a dual role here. And one of the persons that's been leading and on the forefront of the impact of this law, especially in Western Massachusetts, is the Chief of Police in Deerfield, John Pachorik, who also served previously as a chief in Irving throughout his career in law enforcement. So with that, John, I'm going to kick it over to you, Chief Pachorik, I should say. And thank you very much for joining us.
Great, thanks, Sean. John works very well for any follow-up questions afterwards. What I want to do is kind of run through a condensed 133-page law down to about 6 pages. So I'm going to share my screen with everybody in a couple minutes. I'm going to run through the 6 pages, and then we'll turn it right over to Mike Wynn, who sits on the Post Commission. Mike has information that's way beyond my reach and means. So to call me an expert, I think is a little off, but I think I've just tried to learn it the best I can and represent the small town chiefs, serving as the president of Franklin County Chiefs of Police Association. So anything I say incorrect, I'm sure Mike will follow up and kind of just give us the exact information up to date, because his hands are legitimately in it day to day. So with that said, I'm going to start sharing my screen with you guys. We know the governor signed an act relative to justice, equity, and accountability in law enforcement in the Commonwealth, December 31st of 2020. And what the act did was it formed 18 separate commissions. Commissions to study the status of African Americans, Latinos, Latinas, persons with disability, social status of Black men and boys. There's a commission that was there to study models for school resource officer memorandums of understanding, to get the most robust MOUs in place to make sure that we are not putting school resource officers into schools merely to enforce criminal law, because that is the farthest thing from our mind right now. There's a commission for training of state and county correctional officers and juvenile detention officers, a task force on the implementation of body-worn camera, I'm sure a lot of people have seen. There's some concerns right now about the wording in the statute as it exists today, as it does not allow officers to preview their camera footage prior to providing a statement, which is concerning to a lot of chiefs across the Commonwealth. So that's something we're trying to work through currently with the body camera task force. There's a commission to study the use of facial recognition technology. There's a commission to re-examine emergency hospitalizations. That's involuntary mental health committals under Mass General Law 123. We commonly just call them Section 12s. So we want to make sure we're providing the most robust practices when it comes to Section 12s. There's a commission to study and examine the civil service law to make sure it's up to date in the most robust format. Statewide law enforcement cadet program, so we can look to our future generation coming into law enforcement and try and capitalize on them now. Structural racism in correctional facilities, structural racism in the probation service, and parole access. The Municipal Police Training Committee to study costs associated with consolidating the police academies. One of the thoughts out there is it more cost effective to run one academy in the entire Commonwealth and make sleeping quarters available? And that's one of the things that they were charged with investigating. A commission to investigate and study the impact of qualified immunity doctrine. We know that report was released earlier this week, I believe even Monday, or maybe it was released last Thursday or Friday, but that just came out. If anybody needs me to forward that out to you, I'm more than happy to. I know I've shared it with a few chiefs. There's a few documents circulating relative to that. Community Policing and Behavioral Health Advisory Council. And then we all know that they formed in Massachusetts. It's actually Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission. Right below it, you see that all local police, state police, UMass police, environmental police, sworn deputy sheriffs, Massport Transit, public and private college police, and hospital police, pretty much in the Commonwealth, if you wear a badge that says police on it and you carry a gun, this falls under you. There is no circumventing it. One of the questions I often get from chiefs across the state is, if I appoint somebody as an auxiliary police officer, can we circumvent it? And I ask people to use extreme caution. You do not want to start circumventing any part of this for liability. Post-commission makeup. The Honorable Judge Margaret Hinkle was appointed. She's a Superior Court judge of 18 years in Massachusetts. She is amazing. We have Chief Wynn, who was an amazing appointment by the governor. You can't find a more knowledgeable chief in the state when it comes to just a vast variety of instructional material with teaching police officers from the DEA Academy all the way up to Massachusetts. Mike's experience is unbelievable. We have Charlene Luma, who's a licensed social worker. There was appointees of the Attorney General. Larry Calderon, president of Massachusetts Law Enforcement Policy Group. He's also the president of Boston's Patrolmen's Association. Larry Ellison's a detective in the school unit for Boston PD. And Marcia Kazaroshian is a trial attorney. And then we go down to joint appointees by the governor and attorney general. And Dr. Bluestone's a licensed psychologist. We have Clementina Sherry. I know I've met her. I couldn't pronounce her name quick. And then we have Kimberly West. So we have a vast variety of resources that are on the post commission. And certainly Chief Wynn can talk about his relationship forming with them and the educational aspects of it, the misunderstandings, and all the hoops they've been literally jumping through at 100 miles per hour in the last month, trying to make this work within their timelines. And I know we're behind the times in several areas already, but they're doing the best they can, trying to get a robust post commission up and running with all the units and divisions underneath them. So one of the things that I want to jump into is certification of law enforcement agencies. It's pretty much taken out of there verbatim. The Division of Police Certification and consultation with the Municipal Police Training Committee, subject to approval of the commission, shall establish minimum certifications for all law enforcement agencies that shall include, but not limited to, the establishment and implementation of agency policies. In the law, there's actually 8 areas that are specified. One of it is use of force and reporting of use of force, officer code of conduct, officer response procedures, criminal investigative procedures, juvenile operations, internal affairs, officer complaint investigation procedures, detainee transportation, collection and preservation of evidence. So one of the things you're going to notice is that there is the 8 areas. The question I often get from chiefs all across the state is, when we mention certification of a police agency to us generally refers to that red paragraph right below it. It refers to the Massachusetts Police Accreditation Commission. And a certified police agency has 159 criteria that it is required to meet. So there's a vast difference between 8 criteria, the 8 use of the policies as specified in the law, and 159. If agencies are required to join the Massachusetts Police Accreditation Commission, the associated fees and administrative costs for follow-ups for the smaller communities can have quite the impact. So when we review 8 policies a year, or we make sure they're up to date, it's not merely as administratively challenging as 159 criteria. So I think a lot of the small towns really want to pay attention to that as to which way the post commission actually moves along with the municipal police training committee, because it is going to be both that actually cycle the conversation back and forth and which way we proceed forward. The real small towns, when you get into towns of 1,000 to 2,000 people, 159 criteria is going to be very burdensome. If you have a town of 6, 8, 10, 11,000 people, your police department more likely is 10 or 20 full-time. It's easier to find 10 hours or 15 hours of administrative task a week to keep up with that 159 criteria. If your total police budget for a smaller community, for a town of 1,500, is $50,000, it's much more difficult to find that 15 hours a week of administrative time to keep up with 159. So we really want to watch that moving forward from this point, which direction we go with certifying police agencies. All new police officers after July 1st, 2021 will need to be 21 years old. They have to have a high school diploma. They have to complete an municipal police training recruit class. We have stopped the part-time academy. The part-time academies no longer exist. There is a single standard in Massachusetts. That single standard, the current academy, is roughly 780 hours. So there's a vast difference between hiring somebody part-time and full-time. They do have to complete a post-approved medical exam. Most of us have always done that. That's not a big shift. Psychological evaluations were about 60–70% of police departments across Massachusetts were doing them. That is now a requirement for any new hires. They have to pass a state and national background check. Number 7, passage of an examination approved by the commission. That's one of the things I did want to follow up with Chief Wynn about is, what is an examination approved by the commission? I'm not sure they've really defined or highlighted that yet, as they've been so busy going through so many different areas. Successfully complete an interview administered by post. We also want to check with Chief Wynn. I believe they've turned the authority over so a chief can do that interview. This does impact agencies hiring because the small towns, we are very community-based. We like hiring police officers based on community input committees. It's not abnormal that the town administrators sit on it. It's not abnormal that we pull 2 or 3 residents in on it. So we really want to focus on when we send in forms to post to say that we've jumped through all these different areas, that we've completed an interview. Was the interview conducted by a post-authorized individual? And I believe they've turned that authority over to the chief of police. However, the designation has not gotten beyond there. And number 9 is be of good moral character for law enforcement, employment, and post-commission's judgment. Existing personnel will need to be recertified every 3 years. Officers will need to complete their annual 40 hours of in-service training. There's 3 firearms trainings events, of which 2 are supposed to be actually on the range. 1 could be an educational event, first responder and CPR. Those are the basic requirements only. They do not even touch base on any part of specialized programs such as sexual assault investigator, advanced accident reconstruction, background investigation certified. The smaller communities, I've actually recommended that they increase their budget per officer up to 80 hours of training annually. So you may see a significant impact if some of your chiefs of police resubmit their training budgets for FY23 with a significant increase. The Bridge Academy. We know that currently the part-time police officers are required to come up to that single standard. And the only reasonable way to do it was to do a 3-year rollout by last names. So after July 1st, 2021, the part-time academy is eliminated. Anybody that's part-time certified and currently working for an agency will be grandfathered in. However, they will be required to attend a Bridge Academy to bring their certification up to a single standard, which is that full-time level. The average cost for a community is about $6,000 for an officer. That includes wages for the 200 hours. That includes money for ammunition, if any type of medical exam needs to be done, and wear and tear on a cruiser. So the officers on the flip side, once they complete the Bridge Academy, for a lot of our smaller communities that really rely on the part-time officers, they're certainly more marketable in a full-time capacity. So as your chiefs, for the town administrators, the finance committee, the select boards, I know we have some guests from the legislative delegation here. The last names A through H, you're in fiscal year 22, I through P is 23, and Q through Z is in 24. The legislature did allocate $1 million for the Bridge Academy this year to cycle down to local communities. The Municipal Police Training Committee is in discussion about possible reimbursement up to, I believe, $20 or $25 an hour for the 200 hours bridge program per officer. In Franklin County, we were fortunate enough with the assistance of Senator Comerford and the Franklin Regional Council of Governments, where we actually got earmarked for $100,000. And when we divided it out between all of our personnel to do this year, it allowed the towns to get about $2,000 to $2,100, somewhere in that range, from the Franklin Regional Council of Governments. So that was a huge help, thanks to Senator Comerford. The Bridge program is currently 200 hours. There's 80 hours of online learning and testing, which I've encouraged my personnel to do online while they're working and allow the other patrol to cover the roads. Some towns can't do that. They can't dedicate people to do the 80 hours of online learning on duty because there is nobody else working the road to cover those calls if a call comes in. In person, there are 3 blocks that they have to attend in person. One is defensive tactics. It's 40 hours. For ease of use, some of the 40-hour programs are Monday through Friday. Some areas across the Commonwealth have actually gone with all Saturdays. Some have broken it up, and some are actually doing 4-hour blocks to make it easier for our reserve, intermittent, and part-time folks. There's 40 hours of emergency vehicle operation course. We often call it EVOC. Big thing you want to pay attention to with EVOC is those cars get pounded over a week. If you got 4, 8, 10, 15 people you're bridging, that is a lot of pounding on those cars. We are sending people out there to push those vehicles to their limits. And that is the design goal of it. Our goal is when they are responding to a call and it's a robbery or anything else that's a high nature call, and heaven forbid a cyclist go in front of them, they have to know the dynamics of that vehicle to be able to respond in the most accurate and efficient manner to not strike somebody. So we actually designed the course and have them purposely push those vehicles and their own ability to the limits so they know what they can do to avoid future incidents and liability to the community. The flip side of that is you get a cruiser back with bald tires. You get a cruiser back that now needs an alignment. You get a cruiser back that, may have other issues with it. So you do want to be cognizant of that EVOC course and how you're getting vehicles back. The chiefs that I've all seen on here across the Commonwealth are all amazing. They're on this meeting because they're amazing. They're highly in depth, they're highly attuned, and they're extremely professional at what they do. And the last one is the 40 hours of firearms training. 1,500 rounds of ammunition. The cost of that ammunition right now is out of control. There's a shortage. A lot of chiefs are having a hard time even getting their hands on the ammunition. So that is definitely an identified concern across the Commonwealth. So much so that the Municipal Police Training Committee actually voted to cut the round count back to try and help out with some of the shortages. And number 7, once you've completed the 80 hours online of the bridge program, the actual online portion, there's a comprehensive exam that they have to take. So with all this said, in order to be fully certified, personnel within 5 years from January 1st, just a couple weeks ago, will need proof that they have worked 2,400 hours of patrol time responding to calls for service. No part of this includes details or training. Once an officer has completed the Bridge Academy and the 2,400 hours of patrol time responding to calls for service, the chief of police then may submit an exemption form to the Municipal Police Training Committee to be voted on. After a formal vote by MPTC, the officer is then fully certified. There's 3 prongs to this. Number 1 is the Bridge Academy. They have to complete the Bridge Academy by the expiration of their last initial. So that A through H, the I through P, Q through Z, they have to complete the Bridge Academy by that time. If they do not, they're in fact decertified and they cannot work as a police officer. If they complete the Bridge Academy within those respective years, they then can focus on the 2,400 hours of patrol time. That patrol time can go backwards. So you can go back a few years, you can go back 4 or 5 years, improve the 2,400 hours. But what they have said was, we will give you an additional 5 years if you have 0 patrol time to date, or you have 50 or 100 hours and you've been primarily a detail officer. The Post Commission and MPTC have agreed to 2,400 hours of patrol time within 5 years. Once you can prove that 2,400 hours, a chief of police has the opportunity to submit an exemption form to MPTC and request that the officer be granted a permanent exemption. Once they do, they're then full-time certified. Here's the flip side of that. And a lot of the chiefs know it, and they've been ripping my ear off about it. I'm sure they've ripped Chief Wynn's ear off about it. We've all been getting it from every different angle. Once an officer is fully certified, they are then marketable to other agencies as a full-time certified officer. Smaller community agency retention is going to suffer dramatically. There's going to be a shrinking pool of candidates out there. Departments and towns are going to have to increase their compensation packages to recruit and retain qualified officers. We're going to be in the same position that we're really in with teachers right now. We want the cream of the crop, but the teachers are really moving over to the school districts that we see out there with lesser problems, higher pay, better benefits. We are going to see the same thing with law enforcement. It is going to create a market demand. Switching gears a little bit. The law created a duty to intervene and a duty to report in any unreasonable use of force incident. There was already a 1983 case from the SJC, which already addressed the issue. This merely solidified it into law. So that was good. If we have officers out there using unreasonable use of force, this mandates other officers on scene to immediately intervene and report the incident. That is exactly what we want. So that was great. Mandated training classes. These are all ones listed in there. Best practices, including effort to prioritize de-escalation tactics and techniques in crisis response situations, institutional and structural racism and implicit bias. On a side note, MPTC, Massachusetts kind of sets the standards for the nation. We have been doing implicit bias and racism training for approximately the last 8 years, long before this law was thought about. Our municipal police training committee is very proactive and tries to be at the forefront of the vast majority of issues facing Massachusetts and the nation. Number 3, best practices for responding to mass gatherings or protests that shall emphasize de-escalation and minimizing the necessity for use of force. We want people to feel free to be able to protest so long as they're nonviolent. So we want the police officers trained to make sure that they are using the most up-to-date tactics, not using force unless absolutely necessary. Number 4, community policing principles. We've been covering community policing since probably 1996. And we've really been the forefront of the nation for the community policing principles. Juvenile issues and development of the brain. We know by recent studies, standards, that the male juvenile brain doesn't truly fully develop until 25. In my case, I'm not sure if that hit at 45 or 46. Some days that's still to be determined. But we want to keep the juveniles out of the criminal justice system by all means necessary. So this is a great class to add on statewide. There are times that we do put kids in the criminal justice system, however, without arraigning them in front of a judge, but we will have a clerk magistrate mandate some court authorized areas of supervision in hopes that it will assist that juvenile. But we do that in partnership with the school districts and the counselors at the school. So it's a team approach. Again, the focus of number 5 is to keep the kids out of the criminal justice system because we know that brain is not hitting maturity now until 25 years old. And number 6 is mental health and autism. In Massachusetts, we've been focused on this for years and years. This just adds to the great training that we've been doing. Next up, Next up is submission of disciplinary records to the post commission. So under number 1, existing personnel that currently work for the agency. We're due into the post commission by December 31st of 2021. That includes just a summary of the disciplinary records. That does not include the full packets yet. As post hires more resources in the certification unit and they get more robust, that entire personnel file eventually will be shifted down to them with all the substantial documents there to back it up. Right now, it was just a basic Excel sheet with incidents, highlights, details, and just a general overview. Anybody that was transferred out of a police department is due by January 31st of 22. These are police officers that went to another agency. They went to the state police. They retired in the last couple of years. They view them as what's called a transfer. They still want those records on file with their agency. So existing personnel were December 31st and transfers are January 31st. There are still several agencies across the Commonwealth that have not sent records in, or Post just has not processed them yet. I would encourage all of you just to touch base with your chiefs of police and just make sure that those have been sent in. We want to make sure that everybody's in compliance. So the challenge for the smaller communities across the Commonwealth is number 1, identifying $6,000 to $8,000 a year per officer to send them through the bridge program. Again, because of Senator Comerford and the Franklin Regional Council of Governments, we were blessed in Franklin County where we got, quite a bit of money back, $2,000, $2,100, $2,200. I know Linda gave us a good amount of money back out of the $100,000 that was allocated. We actually kept some of that money on the side. Linda and Senator Comerford came up with a great idea to study the future of regionalization and the future of policing in a small town. So out of the 100,000, I think we were keeping aside about 25,000 of it. And we cycled 75 down to the agencies. Departments will need to be certified. And I do want to highlight that with you that we don't know what that looks like in the future. Is it the 8 criteria? Is it up to the 159? Do they have to join the police accreditation commission because there's fees associated with that? Or is there a variation in between? And like I said, certainly Chief Wynn could touch base on that. I'm not even sure if that's on post radar yet. They've been drinking out of a fire hose for 6 months. So we possibly can get more from Mike on that in a few minutes when he starts. Number 3, your hiring practices will change dramatically. Most of us agencies that are considered smaller, we enjoyed putting new people through the part-time academy. They paid their own way through the part-time academy. There was no liability on us. And then we got them back. We would take 2 or 3 or 4, 5 of the best people that we self-sponsored to the part-time academy, and we would put them on as part-time police officers. And we would watch them over a year or 2 working part-time for us. We would figure out who had the best personality, that really wanted to be out there helping the public, that was not overreactive, that was not a problem, and really fit in well and represented the community's needs. And when a full-time opening arose, we then focused on the best quality candidate. The new system is now good, but one of the unintended consequences is it's going to be harder for us to do that. When you go to hire, you're going off a 30 to a 60-minute interview. You're trying to learn as much as you can about this candidate in a background check or that 30 to 60-minute interview, and trying to make the best decision you can for your community. And we know right now that we really want to be focused on who we're hiring as police officers, because not one of us needs anybody stumbling in our community. Not one of us needs to be under a microscope. We really want people out there that are proactive, that want to be part of the community and not just arrest everybody in sight. All new personnel, whether or not they will be utilized on a part or full-time basis, need to go through the Recruit Training Academy. I do view that as a good thing. One of the things that's a pilot program right now is we are fortunate. The executive director of MPTC is a retired chief of police from Woburn. Bobby Ferrulo is amazing. One of the things he started was a part-time basis full-time academy. And there is one happening right now. I'm interested in the next 6 months to see how that turns out. So instead of a part-time academy lasting roughly 5 months, we actually have the possibility of having a full-time recruit class, but instead of lasting 5 months, it probably would go 14 to 16 months. That's a long time off of for somebody to commit to. But if you have somebody that's in your family that's interested and they're a junior in college, is it a side program they commit to? It can be a good thing at the same time. So Bob is amazing. He's exploring every single avenue to make this a positive event for the Commonwealth and mitigate any concerns that the chiefs have. The attrition for the smaller communities, I'm sorry to tell you, for all the folks there, it's going to rise dramatically. If you're paying part-time folks $15, $20 an hour, and they know there's communities out there hiring people at $30 to $40 an hour as patrolmen, they're going to jump ship. And it's only time. One of the things I did want to highlight is in the last 18 months, I've seen the lowest interest in criminal justice candidates that I've ever seen in 28 years. It's been highlighted, as Michael backed me up on, by the International Association of Chiefs of Police, by chiefs all across the country. Our candidate pool is unbelievably low. The state police exam used to get about 35,000 candidates. 35,000 people would take that exam. Last time around, last year, 6,000 took it. Costs associated with hiring a new police officer. We're almost done. We got probably page and a half left, and then I'm going to turn it right over to Mike. So hopefully I'm not boring you. I'm trying to fly through it as quick as I can. Cost to hire a new police officer, whether they're going to be part-time or full-time. So number one, we've really got to focus on what is a commission authorized exam. Is it a civil service exam, or is it a local exam that, you know, the chief of police can administer to 2 or 3 candidates that come in? We've got to focus on that wording that's in the law sometime in the near future. Interview with the chief of police, which is going to trigger a conditional offer of appointment. As part of the conditional offer of appointment, pass a state and national background check, including a decertification index check, medical exam, psychological exam, successfully complete a recruit officer training program, be of good moral character for law enforcement employment by post's judgment. And then in that conditional offer of appointment, we do want to make sure that we include they are on probation for 1 year upon successful completion of the recruit training program in accordance with Mass General Law. So what have we done to date? Number one, post, like I said, has been drinking out of a fire hose. I can't even imagine Chief Wynn's cell phone. They have issued guidance for de-escalation and alternatives to use of force on minor children, which we have cycled down to our folks to sign off on the police department. They have reissued use of force regulations. I believe they're going to be reviewing those again in the near future. Recommendations for de-escalation. Under number 4, draft phase 1, regulations on complaints, inquiries, suspensions, and hearings. The law states that within 2 days upon receiving a complaint, a chief of police has to forward that complaint into the post commission. The vast majority of complaints across the Commonwealth are minor in nature. They're a rude police officer. They're a police officer that just said something that they shouldn't. And it's a situation that really just needs to be addressed in-house. So Post is trying to cycle those down to review the more severe complaints where there is a issue with that officer, recurring or a more major problem where they really need to be reviewed and whether or not some next steps need to take place. Again, we can have Chief Wynn touch base on that. Annual in-service training. What have we done this year? De-escalation and use of force, human trafficking, officer wellness series. We are dealing with a lot of mental health issues right now in the community. I'm not sure social media is helping us. I'm not sure the national media is helping us. Along with us seeing mental health issues in the community, we are certainly seeing the mental health issues with our own personnel. Responding to emergencies involving the mentally ill. Implicit bias training, first responder CPR, and firearms. Existing personnel certified to post. That was all doing earlier this year. Existing personnel disciplinary records, as we previously spoke about. And post commission had to address 511 candidates prior to graduation from the full-time academy, which I'm sure Chief Wynn will probably just jump on quick. Couple more points, and then I'm going to turn it right over to Chief Wynn. The long forgotten criminal justice reform bill passed in 2018. We're still working on that. There are items contained in that we need to address. Number one, there's 3 different criminal tracking databases in Massachusetts. There's probation, mass courts, and III, which is fingerprint supported through the FBI in Clarksburg, West Virginia. We want to cycle that down to make it 1 in Massachusetts. When we do that, it is going to require fingerprint authentication of who we are dealing with. That includes for arrests, it includes criminal complaints once they're issued for arraignment by a court, which means that a lot of departments are going to need to get a live scan unit. Those are commonly referred to as AFIS, the automated fingerprint identification systems. They generally run about $30,000. There is money in the 2018 criminal justice reform bill to fund these. So your chiefs out there were asked to participate in a survey in the last week and a half from the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security. Please check in with them to make sure they have participated in that survey, whether or not they have an AFIS unit. Is it up to date? Because all of our criminal dockets will need to be fingerprinted in the near future. We are told there is discussion at EOPS, the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security, that the maintenance fee, which runs about $2,800 a year, we have one in Deerfield, that they possibly will be picking up that maintenance fee. That is something that we do want to watch because, you know, the dollars do add up quick. So that's one of the things in the 2018 criminal justice reform bill. The key takeaways from, I don't know if I'd call it quick anymore, my quick talking points is hiring practices have entirely changed. To me, it's a more depersonalized approach geared towards the larger agencies. I like to base my hiring procedures more in a small town where really it's a more personalized approach. Training budgets will increase. Recruitment's at a record low. As noted earlier, state police used to get about 35,000 people taking the exam. They got 6,000 this last round. Retention is going to be a massive challenge for the smaller community. People are going to cycle where there's higher pay or better benefits. Agencies are going to need to be certified. Really, we gotta watch to see where the post commission in conjunction with MPTC goes with that key term certified, whether it's the 8 criteria or 159. Officers will need to be recertified every 3 years. Retired officers that are certified may be used. Hours were recently increased from 960 to 1,200 annually. So retired officers out there, so long as they do not let their certification lapse, may be used by the agencies. Agencies are going to transition from part-time officers to full-time only, little by little. If you can hang on to your part-time folks and they're dedicated to your smaller communities, love every day of them, because it is your most cost-effective approach right now. In the future, as they cycle out one by one, it's going to be very hard. The smaller communities, you're likely going to need to look at some type of regionalization or other options. There is going to be a greater reliance on the state police or mutual or primary aid. So the state police, when they had 900 troopers pre-merger in 1990, with 900 people, they used to run at Shelburne Barracks a desk and 2 patrols. They now have 2,200 people and they run a desk and 2 patrols. So at a certain point, it's also hard for them to respond to the communities and address our smaller needs day to day. With that said, I ran through as fast as I could. My mouth got dry about 15 times. I apologize. A lot of information for everybody. I do want to turn it over to Chief Wynn so he can follow up with up-to-date and firsthand information. Chief?
Thanks, Chief. I don't know what I can add. That was the most comprehensive review of police reform that I've heard since being on the Post Commission. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for inviting me to be here with you today. I want to clarify something that Chief Pachoric said, and then I want to just kind of illustrate some of the frustration in being involved in the Post Commission, and then I'll give you a quick timeline of where we've been and what we're doing. Just for all of the administrators on the line, the Post Commission had nothing to do with the 200 hours of online training, 80 hours or 120 hours of in-person training, and 2,400 hours of patrol. That belonged entirely to the Municipal Police Training Committee. They implemented that based on their review of their curriculums. And I think that that's important, because if I have gotten questions from the chiefs in any vein that's been common, it's that there's an opinion out there that the Municipal Police Training Committee now reports to the Post Commission, and that is not the case. The MPTC exists in EOPS, and the Post Commission is a separate commission of that will basically report to the governor's office and the legislature. And so the MPTC still owns training. We own standards and training standards, and there are several things in the legislation that we're responsible for promulgating jointly, but training still sits over there. As the chief said, the law was signed on New Year's Eve, and that's a little misleading, because although the law was signed on New Year's Eve, we didn't get appointed until the following April. And so although the law is, we're going into a full year now, we only actually had 8 months of last year to operate, and we had a bunch of deadlines within that 8 months that were not flexible. And so the list that the chief put up right out of the gate, as soon as we were appointed and formed, we had basically 6 weeks to put together those guidelines on de-escalation and use of force for minors. And if you've ever joined a new team, a bunch of strangers, that's a heavy lift in 6 weeks. As soon as we got that done, we turned right to the use of force regulations. The interesting part about the guidelines is we didn't have to go through the whole legislative hearing process for that, but the regulations required, sending it through approval on both the MPTC and the Post Commission, public comment periods, a public hearing, revisions based on the public comment periods and public hearing, and then sending it to the Commonwealth Secretary's office for final review before they could be promulgated. Those we implemented towards the end of the summer, and as the chief said, they've already been sent back to us with requests for edits and revisions. So 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And then the next big deadline the chief alluded to but didn't specifically address was December 1st of last year. And that became a big deal because every police officer in the Commonwealth who was currently sworn in and working was grandfathered in, and their new recertification standards started. But anybody who was not employed in law enforcement and sworn in now had to comply with some post-commission certification standards, which didn't exist on December 1st. We had the language from the statute, but we hadn't gotten to that point yet. So that left 511 student officers in academies across the Commonwealth who were enrolled between December and anticipated graduations in February that we had to come up with some type of plan for. And so that plan basically, as Chief Patoric said, is attestation by either the chief or the appointing authority that those things that the Chief Patoric enumerated, background investigation, psychological investigation, in-person interview, have been completed or will be completed before graduation. And then those attestations submitted to the post commission, and those officers will be certified. Once that's done for those 511 officers, we have to figure out what the actual certification process is going to look like for future officers and the recertification process for the rest of us. We haven't even begun to tackle that yet. My personal belief is it's going to very closely mirror what we did during this emergency period in December and January. And so those same 9 items will have to be provided on a recurring basis. And the chief of the appointing authority will, basically have to sign off that in the previous 3 years, nothing happened. Nobody got arrested while they were in Vegas since their last certification. That brings me to kind of the 2 big heavy lifts that are in front of us right now. The first is that the post commission will have the authority to remove, decertify, fully decertify, or suspend the certification of an officer based on sustained discipline for misconduct. And of course, we have to protect the officer's due process rights. So that means there needs to be a regulatory mechanism in place. What triggers a review for decertification? What is the administrative process that the post commission has to go through in order to decertify an officer? What are the officer's right of appeals if their certification is suspended or revoked? That is actually the topic of a post commission public meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning. And hopefully after the full commission discusses and hopefully votes on that, then we'll have at least the first draft of those out to the public to show what that process may look like. With that, I want to draw something that the chief said that triggered a memory for me. So the chief has already talked about the difficulty with the language or the statute containing the word certification. And the other language that the statute contains that has caused some confusion is suspension, right? So prior to the passage of police reform, for those of us who work in Massachusetts law enforcement, certification meant one thing. It meant certification through MPAC. Now certification means 3 things. It potentially means certification through MPAC. It means agency certification through the post commission, and it means individual officer certification through the post commission. And there's no differentiation in some cases about which version we're talking about. The same thing occurred in some conversations with the chiefs about suspension. The post commission's authority is limited to suspension of the individual officer's certification. Right? So that has nothing to do with department discipline. The post commission is not going to suspend an officer for misconduct. They may suspend an officer's certification if a chief suspends an officer for misconduct, but those are 2 separate processes. And that was not very clear early on in the formation of the post commission. I will say that, serving on the post commission is, although it's been a heavy lift, it's been a pleasure. My 8 fellow post commissioners are outstanding. I've gotten quite a bit out of working with them, and I've learned quite a bit during the process. But, like Chief Pachorik said, we were appointed in April. We had 6-week deadline on the first set of guides we had to put out. We didn't have any staff. We still don't have any offices. So other than Chair Hinkle, who technically is a full-time post commissioner, but she also still has another job. So even she is mostly a part-time post commissioner. We're all essentially contractors to the Commonwealth, right? All 8 post commissioners are doing the post commission work in addition to their principal jobs, whether that be providing, psychological treatment for Dr. Bluestone, or working as a victim witness advocate, or a social worker, or serving as a reverend or a chaplain. So, nobody is doing this full time except for the staff that we're onboarding. Currently, the staff includes the executive director. We did bring him on board this summer, Enrique Zuniga. We recently brought on full-time general counsel. There are 2 administrative staff now assigned to assist the post commission. We're in the process of making conditional officers for our director of information technology. And the posts are open for the director of the standards unit and the director of the certification unit. Once we get those next 3 in place, then the post commission can start to hire some investigators, and then we can actually settle down and start doing some work. So that's like the 30,000-foot view of the history of the post commission to this point. There's a lot more unanswered than there has been answered, but the big lifts in front of us right now are the regulatory process for certification and decertification, and what the certification process is actually going to entail. So.
Thank you, Chief Wynn. Thank you, Chief Pachorik, for that informative presentation. And I found it extremely helpful that you went in. You didn't go too far into the weeds, but you really helped illustrate the kind of the breadth and scope of this law and what we should be alert to. So, having said that, I wanted to see if, I don't know if Linda Dunleavy, who's the chair of the Rural Policy Advisory Commission, also managing that earmark, wanted to say anything about that, or the RPAC itself also looking at this issue. And then we'll open up to Q&A.
I can add a few things. Hi, everyone. I'm Linda Dunleavy, Franklin Regional Council of Governments, Chair of Rural Policy Advisory Commission. Chief Pachorik talked about the $100,000 earmark secured by Senator Comerford. It was Senator Comerford's intention that that funding would be used to help offset costs being incurred by our small rural municipalities, but also for us to really look at how we are going to deal in the future when it's going to be harder, as Chief Pachorik pointed out, to have part-time officers and retain part-time officers. So we did issue an RFP to look into that. The responses were not great. And we realized actually that there's a lot of work that we can do to make consultant work cheaper by looking at schedules, looking at calls per year, looking at how many officers we have. We'll do that information in-house and then apply for an efficiency and regionalization grant to study that. And our hope is that we will learn about options for Franklin County that we can share with the rest of the rural municipalities who are struggling with the same issue. And the only other thing, Sean, I would say is that I spoke with Senator Comerford yesterday, and she remains committed to both the intention of the police reform legislation, but also to making sure that small rural municipalities are not burdened by this legislation and benefit by this legislation. That's all I got. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you, Linda. So what we're going to do, we have a large group. Was 80 at one point. We still have 70 people on the call, and we'd rather you use your chat function. There were some earlier questions. Ray Parrington had asked a question about costs associated with accreditation. I saw that both Chief Wynn and I'm not sure if it's a chief, but both Pittsfield and Hadley responded in the chat, so you can find those responses. I had one question before, while we wait for the questions to pop up. And to John or to Chief Wynn, and pardon my ignorance, but is there an existing, or was there an existing statute that all police hires have a 1-year probation, or was it at local option? I feel like, I don't want to say, I feel like we have a 6-month probation, but did that change?
There's actually been a law around for years, just nobody knew it existed. It's in the statute.
I love those laws, thanks.
And it's specific to academy graduation, not from data hire.
Yes.
I see.
Yep. And the awkward part is you actually can subtract out vacation days and holidays. Those do not count towards the year, as odd as that is.
Thank you. Do we have questions in the chat? You know, what's interesting is, John, you were so thorough. Oh, here comes a question. Steve, I know I could count on you before we adjourn. We typically have a series at STAM, for those of you who are guests, where we have a 55-minute meeting and we try to focus in and get adjourned in 55 minutes. And Denise Demkowski, thank you, in Stowe, is hosting this for us, booked additional time and is managing this program. So thank you. So the question is, you can all read it, but has there been discussion of how post-disciplinary actions may interact with the disciplinary clauses or policies in local union contracts? I think Chief Wynn was talking about that a bit.
Yeah, so this is one of the areas that's very, very unclear. And I get this question all the time. And the analogy that I've been trying to use to simplify this is, think about post-commission certification like any other professional licensure, right? That's really kind of the best way. So you're a licensed electrician, a licensed plumber, somebody makes a complaint against you, the Commonwealth pulls your license, you take a ticket. That's where the post is going to be. The post commission is not specifically involved in discipline. That remains the authority of the local chief of police. Now, there is going to be some interplay, because obviously, if a police department imposes discipline and then the post commission receives a follow-up and the division of standards says this wasn't sufficient, there's going to be some explaining that there's some interaction that has to go on. If you slap somebody on the wrist and then the post commission subsequently yanks their certification, that's gonna cause some awkwardness. If they lose their certification, their appeal process is going to be the regulatory framework that's being established by post, not the local CBA. So a disciplinary process locally, an administrative certification process at the state level. And again, we're building this plane in mid-flight, kind of as we're going. So lots more questions than answers.
Well, at least you've gotten into the air and you're flying, so that's kudos to you. We're airborne. I would add on that many contracts are at local level. This is for the managers, administrators. For example, if a police officer lost their firearm certification or didn't have a driver's license, then you could take action at the local level. So it sounds like this will be another piece that we need to require either in our job description or our standards that they be post-certified, and we could take the action at the local level. There was a question from Royalston Selectman Deb D'Amico. Will the $100,000 earmark from Senator Comerford for Franklin County be available to other towns in her district? Oh, well, the senator represents Royalston. Linda, that might, I think I know the answer, but I'd like you to answer that.
Actually, that's an excellent question. We did not calculate it for that to be the case. So it's only going to Franklin County towns right now, but that is why Senator Comerford worked so hard to secure another $1 million in this year's budget. But I'll check in with her to see if what she wants to do about that. Thanks.
Thank you. Wasn't trying to throw you under the bus, Linda. I think that earmark was specific to Franklin County. And also spoke with Senator Comerford, and she's aware of this. The $1 million will be available to small towns generally as it works its way through however the state's going to dole it out, whatever agency doles that out, and they're going to seek additional funds going forward.
Yeah, the $1 million is going to come out from the Municipal Police Training Committee in the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security. So you should start to see information on that in the next 30 to 45 days. The $100,000 was specifically earmarked for Franklin County, just to be dispersed through the Franklin Regional Council of Governments.
Thank you. Question from Joe Curlin: does de-escalation training include avoiding situations that can put an officer in danger, such as reaching into a car, which puts an officer in danger of being dragged?
De-escalation techniques are focused around basically using time and cover to our advantage. So I would say, yes, we want officers to take a deep breath, take a step back, and take longer talking to somebody and utilizing all different assets that we give to them versus instantly reacting like we trained people to do 20 to 25 years ago. Chief Wynn, what did I miss?
So I want to address this question, but I want to clarify something because I think it addresses this question as well as a subsequent question I just saw. Training, de-escalation training, and the curriculum for de-escalation training still belongs to the Municipal Police Training Committee, not within the purview of the Post Commission. So whatever that training does or will include is the responsibility for Executive Director Furillo and his staff. Now, I can tell you that for years, Patrol Procedures Training has addressed this issue of creating the jeopardy because of tactics that we've observed elsewhere in the country. The use of force regulations jointly promulgated by the Municipal Police Training Committee and the Post Commission specifically address lethal force in motor vehicle stops not being allowed if the officer created the jeopardy. So that's within the regulations.
Well, we opened the floodgates a little bit. So a few more questions. You can, again, read them in the chat and jump in if you have an answer. One town is appointing a chief from another town just to do licensed carries. The person is certified. Do we need to do anything special to hire? It's a town of 650 people. I should know what that is. I think that's the smallest town in the Commonwealth. Maybe it's Hawley. I don't know.
If the chief is currently certified with his current employer, he remains certified. The certification is not tied to the town. It's statewide.
The question, there was another question, can an officer from another town still do details? And I think the answer is the same, Chief. If they're certified, and they can be employed.
I will say, so I don't have part-time officers and I haven't had to deal with this, but many of my fellow Berkshire chiefs have. A lot of the retirees who have been doing details out this far west, they don't want to be bothered with this. So a lot of communities are essentially creating traffic control agents, non-sworn, unarmed flaggers who work for the police department. So there's other ways to explore this. They can't have rights of arrest and carry a firearm if they're not certified.
That may be a topic for a future discussion. That's interesting. There was a question to Chief Wynn in the chat. Does MPTC still grant temporary waivers for an officer to work until accepted in the academy? And Chief is getting different answers on that.
So again, I can't speak for the MPTC. I'm not a member of the MPTC. There are chiefs who are on there. And this is one of those issues that is being hammered out within the MPTC right now. And it's another one of those issues where we didn't deconflict the language. So the statute includes language about waivers and exemptions. And in the world of the MPTC, those are two different things, but in the statute, they were treated interchangeably. And so it's not likely that once we get through the certification process, that an officer who is pre-academy, not certified, is going to be able to work once we establish the certification process. If they are certified or in their process of bridging, and now they're within that 5-year window for the 2,400 hours, yes, they would be able to continue to work.
A question on whether, I don't think this did come up. Is there a sense of how civil service may change due to this process and the layers involved?
So the
That's a
chief
good
went
one.
down that extensive list of other commissions and committees that were established by the legislation. One of them is civil service. I know they were meeting very actively this summer, and then they kind of got really quiet. And as a civil service chief, I'm afraid they got really quiet because they didn't really like what they found out there. There is going to have to be some change to civil service as a result of this. Now, it could go one of two ways. It could implode civil service entirely, or the Commonwealth can decide to invest considerable money in getting civil service back up to full speed, but I have no sense of which direction that's going right now.
The most recent survey that we put out at Mass Chiefs, I believe if my numbers are correct, came upwards of over 60 to 70% of communities in civil service were interested in getting out, which did not sit well with this commission. So Chris Del Monte, that sits on the Mass Chiefs Executive Board with me, is our rep to this commission. He's been giving us updates at the e-board meeting, and there's several issues that they're trying to work on. They're going to be giving tests annually, Steve, not every 2 years now, which is going to be problematic because of that time the lists are certified and then you getting candidates into the academy. I'm not sure that's in your best interest or not, but you know, I was talking to the Chicopee chief, and a month before the last civil service test, the closing date for it, he had 13 people in the city of Chicopee signed up and paid for. 13 people. He goes, I hire 13 people a year, John. So it's going to be a challenge.
Now we have a fourth definition of certification.
Opt out, Steve. Get your select board and town meeting to opt out. That's my advice.
I think Orange would concur with that.
So would Athol. I'm going to skip. There's a long question I'm going to come back to. Here's another one regarding ARPA funds, whether it can be used to pay for the increased training. Any sense on that?
The
I've been
directives
studying
I've seen,
that.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
The answer is yes. Actually, yeah, I'll embellish upon that. Our entire membership in STAM, communities of 12,000 or less, your ARPA allocation is based upon population. So Athol's right at the 12,000 level. Our allocation is about 3.5 million. So probably everybody on this call is at that or less. And under the final rule, you can exempt or use the allowance of up to $10 million to have immediate access to your ARPA funds for any lawful general government expense. And of course, police training would be that amongst other things. So that was good news on the federal. It was mentioned that the cost of the reform bill will help cover the cost of the live scan fingerprint machines. Is it still available? How do we apply? I think somebody said that was in the 2018 bill.
Yes, it was. There's money still sitting there in A&F at the state level. That's why the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security put out a survey, and they want to know from departments. Again, I would encourage all the town administrators, go back and check in with your police chief just to make sure that they did fill out that survey.
Okay, thank you. That's good advice. Kelly. Smallest town is Gosnell. I should have known that, population 35. I'll go back to this question. I don't see it. I see an email address, screen name, but I don't know who this is. There are a few items that make it very hard for part-time officers, including the hands-on training during the standard work week. As of last week, only 3 of 80 classes listed were outside the normal work week. Why is there a 2,400 hour work requirement once the training is completed? This does not exist with full-time officers. The training is completed. Why is that a requirement? That's a separate question. And the requirement of a new hire physical. This is eliminating some existing part-time officers' color sight deficiency as an example. I'm not sure that's a question, but if anybody wants to comment.
I'll comment, but again, these are all issues that were decided entirely by the Municipal Police Training Committee. And so they really have to be directed to the Municipal Police Training Committee. The task of determining what was going to be necessary to go between the Reserve Intermittent Academy and full-time status was entirely internal to the MPTC. We're dealing with some of those issues with some of my fellow Berkshire chiefs out here with the difficulty. We're encouraging the MPTC to put some additional hands-on trainings on the weekends. It really comes down to the availability of the instructors. So I would reach out for the MPTC and reach out for your regional academies to see if they can help you with that.
Thank you. And I guess that's a good clarification. One that wasn't clear to me until today's call is that the post commission, you're setting guidelines and policy, but the MPTC is still the boots on the ground, providing or managing the training itself. Is that fair?
So early on in the negotiations of police reform, there was some initial interest in deactivating the MPTC and sliding all training under the post commission. And Governor Baker pushed back on that. So the MPTC still exists as a standalone entity. They're responsible for training and training delivery. There are certain elements within the police reform law that the post commission and the MPTC are responsible for jointly, largely regulations and sample policies. And then the post commission in the area of training, basically our responsibility is to establish standards for training. So we'll establish some high level standards, turn them over to the MPTC, and they have to operationalize them.
Excellent. Very helpful. It looks like I don't see any other questions in the chat. Mitch? Oh, Mitch with a thank you. And unless Chief Wynn or Chief Pachurk, if you have any closing comments or advice, we'll open it up.
I do have one final thing I'd like to say, and I don't say this in the hopes of getting anybody's hopes up. I'll put it out there as food for thought, because the chief was very clear that this issue around the use of the word certification and what that means and where it means is going to cause an issue. MPAC, the Massachusetts Police Accreditation Committee, is currently a private nonprofit entity, hence the need they have to charge fees. They were previously a Commonwealth organization, a Commonwealth agency. And if they were a Commonwealth agency again, the need to charge those fees would go away. So there is definitely, if they're going to hold agencies to the 159, there definitely should be some movement towards making the Commonwealth responsible for the cost of holding the agencies responsible.
That makes sense. John, anything further from Chief Pachurk?
No, just thank you for everybody in attendance. If you ever have a question, reach out to me or your chiefs of police, because like I said, every chief I've seen on here is utterly amazing, and they all know how to get a hold of me immediately. So Chief Wynn and myself are always available. Just Mike gets, I average 200 to 300 emails a day. He probably gets well beyond that. Can't even imagine.
Thank you, Chief Pachurk. And you know, it prompts me to say that we have utterly amazing town administrators and managers as well on the call, and selectmen. I gotta appeal to my constituency too, John. We are. What a good crew. Great meeting. I appreciate all the attention. And John, are we able to, could I convert your presentation to a PDF and distribute it?
Absolutely. Yeah. I just sent it back to you and Casey with the most up to date. Yep.
I can do that for you, Sean.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Thank you, Casey. Denise, thank you for hosting the STAM meeting today, and we'll have more programs coming up, and we wish you all a great day. Bye-bye.